Good morning, everyone. I hope you all had a nice tea break. I would like to invite the session in charge, Dr. Vaishali Zundre, Head, Department of Student Welfare, Symbiosis International University, to start off the session on the theme Transformative Role of Universities in Promoting Gender Equality. Ma'am, please.
A very good morning to all of you, dignitaries in the audience, delegates, colleagues, and dear students. Today, this wonderful celebration of ideas, the Uni 20 festival, like Dr. Muzumdar sir addressed it yesterday, is coming to an end, leaving us with thoughts to ponder and ideas to work upon. I, Vaishali Zundre, the head of the Department of Student Welfare, welcome all of you to this session based on a very poignant topic, gender equity. I believe education plays a very important role in promoting gender equity. Educational institutes should take a lead in promoting equality between sexes and break the gender stereotype approach. Creating a safe and secure environment for students and staff is something that Symbiosis International University has always strived for. Building awareness about gender equity and equality, arranging lectures, workshops for the same is a priority at this university. We also appoint gender champions, students, male as well as female, to work and take this cause deeper to the roots of the university. As the head of this department, I'm glad to take this opportunity to welcome eminent speakers for this session today, the transformative role of universities in promoting gender equity. May I welcome today's chairperson, Dr. Renu Vinod, adjunct faculty at the Symbiosis School of Liberal Arts, SIU, Dr. Andrea North Samardzic, Director, Women's Entrepreneurship Research Alliance, Senior Lecturer, Department of Management, Deakin Business School, Deakin University, Australia, Dr. Chindu Sridharan, Associate Professor of Journalism, Bournemouth University, UK, Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, Director, Women in Security, Conflict Management and Peace, Viscomp, India, and Ms. Neha Khandekar, Gender Diversity and Inclusion Consultant, very much from Mumbai, India. I welcome Dr. Renu to take over.
Thank you, Dr. Vaishali. To our distinguished speakers, guests, and colleagues, it is my privilege to chair this session on the transformative role of universities in promoting gender equity. The crucial need to foster gender equity and healthy gender relations has long been recognized by the G20 as a prerequisite for peaceful, productive, and sustainable societies. To this end, discussions on gender equality, gender equity, specifically in relation to women, and therefore the transformative role of education to achieve these have been central to the creation and strengthening of critical dialogues and policy frameworks that focus on women-led development. For instance, the W20 or Women 20, which was established in 2015 during Turkey's presidency of the G20 to focus on gender equity, meets regularly to discuss ways to support women across various sectors, both in the public and private spheres, through policies that reduce gender gaps and sustain the active contribution of women in education, the labor market, digital access, and so on, in the hope that these would lead to their empowerment. Since India assumed the G20 presidency in December 2022, the focus has been on shifting the center of attention from women's development to women-led development. Today's parallel session on the transformative role of universities for gender equity continues to take up this concern of the G20 with women's empowerment. Gender equity via the transformation of higher educational spaces and society at large highlights the intersection of key UN Sustainable Development Goals, namely those of gender equality and inclusion, and ending of all forms of discrimination against all women and girls everywhere, with some of the key concerns raised in India's most recently updated National Education Policy of 2020. The NEP 2022 recognizes the need for inclusive and quality higher education with a gender lens for two reasons. It acknowledges that women are represented across all the socioeconomically disadvantaged groups in India and make up about half of the socioeconomically disadvantaged groups in the country. And that in order for India to successfully make the transition towards a progressive, productive, and peaceful knowledge society, it needs the active participation and contribution of its women, who therefore need ample support to access and sustain themselves in higher educational institutions. Gender pay gaps, the underrepresentation of women in senior and middle management roles within the corporate sector, and the adverse effects of COVID-19 on women's occupations, both in the formal sector and in the informal service sector, are merely symptomatic of wider cultural structures pertaining to gender that reinforce unequal relations. Attempts have been made in the past and continue to be made as we speak to make higher educational institutions more gender sensitive and increase awareness about unequal gender power relations so that the wider cultural structures that inhibit women and girls' access to higher education, increase their dropout rates, and disempower them may be identified and large-scale changes initiated. Some of these will be discussed by our esteemed speakers today. Today's panel examines universities both as a workplace that requires gender-sensitive policies and as a space of learning for the youth, but one which can lead to differential experiences and consequences based on gender. Our speakers come with strong credentials from the academic and development sectors. They will speak on the existing policies on gender equity in their universities and the challenges in implementing them, particularly in India, Australia, and the UK, and the importance of conducting gender audits to ensure that gender-related policies are doing their job effectively. To begin with, I invite Ms. Sneha Khandekar to share with us her crucial insights about the effectiveness of Saksham, which is India's University Grants Commission's guidelines to improve the safety of women on higher educational institution campuses. Each speaker will get about 14 minutes to speak. At the 9-minute mark, you will get a reminder that you have 5 minutes left to speak. After all the 4 speakers have spoken, I will open the session for audience questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Renu. Good morning, everybody. I'm really glad to see, we were just discussing as a panel that we have such a good audience in front of us, and I really look forward to very interesting deliberation on this particular issue. The reason is that what we are looking at is a dialogue, right? This is sharing of experiences that we are looking at. As a practitioner in this field for more than 35 years, what I will be sharing is my experiences in mainstreaming gender at different places. It could be education, it could be other workplaces also. But I'm going to focus on education sector because that's our theme. And that's what you're looking at, as how universities can transform, how do we look at this transformation? And the transformation that we're looking at is from a social perspective. So one thing we all have been saying that it is difficult to change the mindsets, right? That's one thing. And one of the reasons why we need to focus on universities from this perspective, and that is what Saksham report also tells us, that these are the formative years that boys and girls, men and women are part of this place where you have to expose them to different experiences, thought processes, to ensure that we are creating future in such a way that they have inclusivity as part of their thought processes. So though I'm focusing on women, I want to also just flag off this aspect that Saksham doesn't only look at binary division of sexes. And I think Saksham is very proactive in that perspective. they say it's just not men and women that we're looking at. We're looking at other aspects of sexuality, and this is what they begin with. Even the UGC guidelines that we have from a POSH perspective, which is prevention of sexual harassment perspective, is also progressive, acknowledges men's sexual harassment. So UGC has made their policy gender neutral, while the law is gender specific. So I think even from a policy perspective, they are looking at education sector as a sector which will help this transformation. And this is what we all are interested in as stakeholders, to ensure that we do this. And how do we do this? I mean, we have policies, and we have, Saksham report, and we also have a law. But let's talk about operationalization more than just what the law is. But yes, I want to touch upon few things from Saksham as guidelines for all of us, because I do believe we have stakeholders who are present here who may be, in an administrative positions to influence a lot of these things that we're talking about. So what does Saksham tell us? Saksham says create gender inclusive campuses, right? That's what Saksham tells us. Saksham also gives us guidelines in terms of how do you do it. So they give us modules. They tell us these are the things that you need to do in terms of maybe the gender audits that we will be speaking about. We're also talking about safety audits. So these are different guidelines which are coming from Saksham. But every university will have to come out with their own plans of action. I strongly feel that we need to look at all this aspect at a granular level. I mean, what works for Symbiosis may not work for anybody else as a university. So I think what Saksham gives us is a larger framework to look at. But every university has to look at their own workplace or university, come out with different, challenges or spaces that they have within their own university, which they need to look at. The whole socio-cultural aspect, which is very much focused on in Saksham, has to be addressed very clearly. Saksham is just not talking about the curriculum. Saksham is not talking about what are the academic inputs that need to be given. Saksham is talking about larger, expectations from universities, which is what our role is, right? Influencing the young minds which are coming to our universities. I was told yesterday, and I was not part of that discussion in yesterday morning, where students were speaking. And I was told by few people who attended that session that even the language in which the students were speaking differed from universities, and the language tended to be more inclusive in some and was not so inclusive in others. And that's what we're looking at. The Saksham tells us this, that how do we give those opportunities? How do we give those platforms to our students, expose them to different ideas, and do the capacity building of these students to make decisions about different issues that are in front of, and one of them is gender. I strongly believe that these soft skills that we're talking about are very important. The academic rigor is important. I'm not negating that. But I think along with this academic rigor, the emphasis on these softer issues are much more important, because that is what will build that perspective that we are looking at. See, when I look at the corporates, and I work considerably with a lot of corporates across India, across sectors, and I keep meeting these people, and I keep looking at them, I said, I wish they were exposed to some of these things a lot earlier in their early lives. So what they're facing today, the kind of challenges in understanding what we're trying to tell them, was much easier for them at that time. It's difficult to change the mindset at the stage at which they are than what we can do at this stage. So I think we have a very, very clear role in ensuring that we are shaping up those young minds which are in front of us, in terms of giving them these thought processes. See, one thing that the social scientists have always said is changing thought processes is difficult, but I think changing behavior is a little bit easier. You're sitting 2 hours in a flight, you're told not to smoke, and you do that, right? So changing behavior, but then changing thought process is what we are looking at, and our role is there. We are talking about not changing just behavior, but we are also talking about changing the thought processes that are very important. And Saksham clearly focuses on them. It also gives us various advisories in terms of what you can do. Create gender committees, create committees to address sexual harassment at workplace, create also anti-ragging committees. I'm just taking example of these 3 forums to make people understand the nuanced experiences that students and other stakeholders can have within workplace. So there can be gender discrimination, there can be sexual harassment, and there can be ragging. So these are just 3 primary experiences that I'm looking at. And they're different. There has to be a different ways in which we address them. And that is acknowledged by the law, our policies, and we need to do that. All this is why? Access to education, that's our primary goal, that is what we are here for. And we need to understand it's just not access, but subsequently what happens when they have actually accessed that education. Just last week, I was speaking to a girl who is in her first year of medical college, and she was facing certain issues of sexual harassment, because of which she's almost about to leave that college. And this is a reality. This is a reality that we must realize, that access to education will depend on a lot of these safety issues that we're talking about. You know, I was just in the other session today, and people are talking about just 10% of people who have access to this and access to that. And we need to remember this very clearly, that what you have here is not really what is the reality, right? And there are different kinds of students that we have who are coming to our universities, and they have their own challenges. Our job as universities to ensure that some of the experiences are not what will lead to that access. That's our primary goal. But subsequently, even ensuring that they also become champions in future is also what we have to look at. We're not just giving those access, but we are also creating those mindsets in future. So there have to be gender committees according to this Saksham report, which will deal with some of these issues. We have to create gender champions. And as a Symbiosis University, I want to tell you that we are one of those private universities who have focused consistently on gender all the time. We have realized gender is a cross-cutting concept in all the multidisciplinary education that we are giving to all our students. There are constant conversations that we are having with our students with respect to that. So if we have to really understand what are the practices that need to be there on the universities, the first and foremost thing is give opportunities for students to voice their grievances, their experiences, which are very important. Very important. Students spend such a large, considerable part of their formative life on the campuses. They are here, they're staying also here. So there are a lot of peer understanding which also happens, and there is also role models that they see at universities. All of us have a role to play in all that. We have to walk the talk. So as administrators, as deans, as vice chancellors, as HODs, as professors, we all need to be gender sensitive in every aspect of our work. Our language is what we start with. I think most of the times we do not realize that our language can also be very gender insensitive. Our curriculum, very important. But at the same time, the other activities, opportunities that are there will also have to be there. there are also typically certain conversations which keep happening all the time. So the moment we talk of gender, women's participation, people will talk about increasing their participation in STEM. Let's not limit ourselves to that. We need to be looking beyond that, because even if we look at STEM, what we realize is it's not that we don't have presence of women. We have a considerable presence of women in life sciences, but then we do not have men's presence in the caregiving faculties. I think gender is not about women, gender is also about men. So as universities, it is important that we highlight this aspect very clearly. Right? And men's involvement in all the issues of women, I mean, it could be health, it could be education, anything, there has been a documented evidence on that saying that it is critical. Right? So let's also involve more men into these conversations, because that will also lead to that change. When you have any conversation about gender, people tend to think, yeah, this is all women thing. No, it is not. I want all of us to start looking at gender as a human rights issue. I think that is what it is. It's not about women. It's about human rights. It's also about men. Right? So let's start having those conversations at all level, and then understand what the newer generation feels about it. It's also very important to understand that there will always be a difference in the generational understanding of situations. It doesn't mean I'm right and they're wrong, right? I think somewhere in education, it's also important to understand, to have these adult-to-adult conversations and not be seen as parent-to-child kind of a conversation with our students, right? So these are some of the nuanced changes that could really help us to take this forward very effectively. I want to touch upon the whole prevention of sexual harassment aspect too, in the last 2 minutes that I have, because I do a considerable work across India on this particular issue. I strongly feel that is one issue that all the universities must address. They have to ensure that they are implementing the law which they are expected to do. It is important that they implement the UGC guideline, which is very clear. Unfortunately, I find stakeholders even not reading the UGC guidelines. It is so sad. It's extremely sad when you understand that people don't know what the UGC guidelines are talking about, right? And they're very clear. So please ensure that we have that also in place. Every organization expected to have a policy in place with respect to that. And when I talk about safety of the campuses, which is again another mandate which is given to us by universities, let's not only talk about behavioral safety, we also must look at the infrastructural safety in the campuses. Both are very important. From a safety perspective, we need to focus on infrastructural safety, we need to focus on the behavioral safety. And behaviors can be of different nature. Right? So these should be definitely the focus in terms of changing the mindset. So if we do that at this time with our students and other stakeholders, it will be important. Last and not the least, the way universities have changed as workplaces, it is really important to notice that. The kind of stakeholders which are present in our workplaces are much more different than what they were before. The kind of outsourcing that is happening, and then that also leads to a lot of fluidity and also different kinds of interactions. We should be mindful of that. So it's just not students that we need to focus on, we need to also focus on the safety of other stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sneha Khandekar, for sharing your views on the decentralized nature of the Saksham guidelines and therefore the importance of exchanging best practices across universities and also the need to broaden the definition of gender as well. Thank you. So our next speaker is Dr. Andrea North Zamajic, who will speak on gender equity policies and practices in the Australian university context, using findings from her research on best practices pertaining to gender equity in the workplace. She will also be speaking on how universities need to make changes for better diversity and inclusion in teaching and research. Just for Andrea, I will make an exception as she has to leave early in order to catch a connecting flight back to her home. So in case there are any audience questions after her talk, we'll be happy to take them.
Thank you, Dr. Renu. Also, I think I might be speaking a little bit less time to allow more time for questions, because I understand that the Australian context might not be familiar to many of us, so you might be really interested to find how many of your ideas and thoughts and beliefs actually transcend your current context and into foreign shores. So I'll be talking today a little bit about my research. I started in academics, 21 years ago, as of the 1st of July. I started researching gender and leadership all the way back then. I also started as an academic staff member. I was a student at the time as well, so I do want to reflect on my time as a student as well as my experience as a staff member. And I think it can really be summed up by the quote that you often hear, that is, we've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go. And I will say that we have come a long way, because thinking about my experience, neither of my grandmothers finished high school. My mother went to teachers' college and she wanted to be a doctor, but my grandfather told her, no, you're going to take the place of a man who should really have it. But then he only had one grandchild who was a female grandchild, and he went, oops, I better correct what the mistakes I did before. And so now they have a professor travelling the world. So we have come a long way when I think about where my grandmothers were at, and the progress to my mother and the progress to me. And I cannot wait to see what's going to happen for the next generations if we keep up this pace. And we really need to. In fact, I think we need to accelerate it, quite frankly, because the more we think about and talk about these issues, the more we realise that, as you said, Ms. Sneha, this is a human rights issue. It's not just about a women's issue. And as someone who's in a business school, it's not just about the business case for gender equity, it's about what is right. Of course, there's a business case, but it's also simply the right thing to do. So in terms of my research, I wanted to know why there weren't more women leading Australian organisations. So I chose 3 best practice organisations and went in and did interviews and did a bit of ethnography as well. And unfortunately, what I found was that a lot of these policies of best practice were simply window dressing. Everyone was putting together some wonderful reports and fudging some statistics and submitting them to the regulator and becoming, employer of choice for women. And then once you scratch that surface, you realise, yes, you have a sexual harassment policy, but no one's using it. There's policies that say you have the right to request leave, but your request will be denied. Or you don't feel comfortable requesting it because you know if you take up your parental leave entitlements, and this speaks to men as well, that you feel that you'll be away from your job and that will disadvantage you. So another message I want us all to be clear on is that policies aren't enough. It's all about the practice. So let's not just think we've got things on paper, it's about how we're operationalising that. Because I've spent many years looking at how these policies can make people think, make organisations think that they're working, but we don't have the courage to interrogate whether they are really working because we don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations. Now, I don't know about you, but I try to go to the gym, somewhat, and I know when my exercise is working because I feel sore the next day. I feel uncomfortable. You push past that, and that's when you get progress, you get that fitness. It's that same way. If you're not feeling uncomfortable, you're not growing, but the more you push yourself to sit in that uncomfortability and progress through, the more you'll feel comfortable talking about these things. For example, the example you gave, Ms. Sneha, about that young medical student, that was my story. I was sexually harassed by my PhD supervisor for over 2 years before I had the confidence to speak up. Eventually I did, but I had to leave that program. I lost my scholarship and I had to start all over again. I would not change that for anything in the world, but by us speaking up, it means that these stories will be fewer and fewer. And the more people who've experienced it speak out about it, the less shame there will be, because shame breeds silence. And that speaks for men who experience these things as well, because men often carry greater shame than women with these particular issues. So it is super important that we speak up, we speak frankly, we share our stories, because then we move past shame and we prevent that silence. And that goes for implementing policies in organisations as well. If things aren't working, are we prepared to speak up? That's really the key thing that I found with my research. Do people feel that there's safety in voice, in speaking up when things aren't working? The other thing that came through my research is about accountability and responsibility. We often have these wonderful policies, but who's actually responsible for actioning them? And what's the accountability if they're not being actioned appropriately? And can accountability extend from rewarding performance to actually punishing non-compliance or inactivity? Are we bold enough to take that step? And I don't think we are. We like to celebrate wins, but we're rarely comfortable holding people accountable when they don't actively take responsibility and accountability. And I think that's something we need to push past, feel uncomfortable, so we can get comfortable around that. So my research on leadership turned into my research on entrepreneurship. And what's really interesting is that the conversations being had about gender equity and entrepreneurship are the ones we had about leadership decades ago. So that's a really interesting space. But thinking more specifically about universities, one university was my case study for my PhD. So I interviewed students, I interviewed female and male staff members, and it was really interesting to kind of peel back the layers of the onion that are in universities to find out what some of the issues are. And these are some of the ones that I'm going to talk about now in the Australian context, from my experience and also in my research. I want us to think about students, and I want us to think about staff as well. So thinking about students, let's think about how they're engaged in teaching, in the research process, but also in university life. So thinking about teaching, what are we doing to make our classrooms and degrees accessible? What are we doing to make things more inclusive? Are we using things such as gender neutral language? Are we creating a specific gender culture in the classroom? That's something you need to think about. Something I've really pushed hard for is, I teach in the MBA. It's a post-experience MBA, and I was MBA director for 2 years. And I wanted to push for scholarships for women, particularly because I wanted more women from industries that weren't as highly paid to be part of our MBA programs, because I think MBA programs can often be privileged towards the, service industries, consultancies, the big four. And one of my brightest stars was a wedding planner. And I remember that, and I saw her application, and it was phenomenal. I saw her CV, and I thought, if this woman can negotiate with bridezillas, she should teach conflict management, quite frankly. So thinking, what are some non-traditional areas? Can we use the language of our degrees more open? What are the photos that we're using to promote things as well? Who are the people we're putting forward as examples? Are we always choosing the same type of person from the same background or industry to showcase our degrees? Something that's also really important for me for post-experience masters is having flexibility, because even in Australia, women have the greater share of domestic duties. So if we don't have flexibility, it means that women are less likely to do post-experience MBAs because they have family duties as well as careers. But what's actually interesting, I don't know if who knows this, is that the way in which we go into university programs in Australia is actually pretty straightforward. We do a test in our last year of high school. Oh, thank you. I said I'll be short. Academic hazard, isn't it? Always the way. We do a test in our last year of high school. We get a number, and that number determines whether we're in or not. We don't do interviews, even in our MBA programs a lot of the time. So I think that's kind of good because it means things are more blind and objective, but it doesn't mean that we don't have a long way to go. I want to call out a few things in terms of staff now. Academics, we suck up all of the air when it comes to gender equity. It's how do we get more women professors? How do we get more women leading universities? Professional staff are the lifeblood of our universities and they are predominantly women in these roles. We need to have conversations around gender equity for professional staff and their career progression as well. Many of these roles are part-time and we know that part-time roles means that you are less likely to have career progression. I've met a lot of academics in my time and I haven't met that many of them who are fantastic managers. So I think that having more women in professional staff who are trained as managers leading universities is a pathway that we should strongly consider. And in Australia in particular, we have a highly casualised workforce. Lots of contracts. More women tend to be in those contract roles, which means less job security and also less career progression. Women over the age of 50 in Australia are the most financially insecure people in the nation because we do not have sufficient superannuation, sufficient savings in order to sustain the rest of our lives. So I think it's incredibly important that we don't just focus on academics when we're talking about gender equity in universities as well. So, in a few key points left, how do we do better? One, get a strategy. What is your strategy? What gets measured gets done. Policies aren't enough. You start with a strategy and work from there. Two, do you have senior leadership buy-in and are they advocates and active, visible champions as well? We need male champions for change, not just female champions for gender equity. Then you have your policies from there. Don't jump straight to policy. Strategy, leadership, then your policies. I feel like I'm teaching one of my management classes, but like I said, occupational hazard. Then you need people trained in these policies as well. We have the policies and think they're going to work. How are you training people in them? And then finally, how are we holding people accountable? How are we not just rewarding action, but withholding rewards for inaction as well? What I would like to finally say is that when we want change, we have to be prepared to give up something. Time, resources, money, or power. But if we want to do things differently, we all have to make that change. And the change that has happened in my family through education has happened through day-to-day practices. So that's something we can all do. We can all make that promise to ourselves and the society around us to do things differently, make ourselves uncomfortable so we can see change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Andrea, for walking us through your experiences as a product of intergenerational transformation in Australia, as a survivor of sexual harassment, and also as someone who has pushed the envelope when it comes to operationalizing gender practices. So thank you for that. Our next speaker is Dr. Chindu Sridharan, who I now invite to share his thoughts on addressing gender concerns through supercurricular activities, particularly within journalism education, and the challenges of translating policy and guidelines into meaningful changes. Oh yes, I'm so sorry. Thank you, Dr. Chindu. So since Dr. Andrea has to leave, can we have some questions if there are any? Yes, please.
You said that there should be strategies in place. And you were going to talk about the best practices. So any one strategy that you feel worked, maybe that would help us in getting some insights.
Absolutely. The main thing you need to do is actually pick a number. What does success look like? What does representation look like? When we are looking for these things, you need to actually have really tight measures for success, because what gets measured gets done, and I think people are afraid to really say, this is the number we want, this is what action and success looks like. Organisations that have really clear goals and say, we want 50% representation at C-suite by 2040, mean that they've got a really clear goal and can work backwards from there. Now, you can call them goals or targets or quotas, you can call them whatever you like, but if you're not prepared to pick a number and hold people accountable to it, then you're just going to be spinning your wheels.
So my second part of the question is, let's assume you have the numbers. Then there has to be some in-depth strategizing, because you may have the numbers which what gets measured is there. There is accessibility, there is acceptance, there is the gender ratio, neutrality, everything is there. But how to deep dive into it then?
That takes a lot of time. Unfortunately, I think that Sneha can probably talk about that as well. There is no one best way, because I don't think there's any organisation that we can hold up as that lofty goal. So we've got practices kind of dispersed around the world. They're doing it in pockets here and pockets there, but no one's actually really cracked it properly. But we're all working together. So I think that rather than think what is seen to be best practice, what is our best practice and how are we bettering ourselves every single day. So establish what's best practice for you within your context and slowly move that needle. Do not expect change overnight. We don't see that change. Like my gym metaphor, you don't see yourself losing weight until one day you wake up and go, oh, look at me. So, you're not going to see that. But then one day you're going to stand back and say, wow, look at what we've accomplished. So patience.
Yes, please, lady there. Can I request you to please introduce yourself first and then ask the question?
Hello, my name is Situya Angela Rangwani. I am from Botswana, a small country in Southern Africa. My question to you is, you talked about the flexibility of masters, because we know that women have a lot of home duties, but I didn't hear you talk about the flexibility of masters when it comes to men, because more men now are committing suicide more than women because of the mental health issues. So I didn't hear you touch about mental health issues, especially towards men, because they have a lot of pressure. They have to take care of the family. We expect this from men. So what are the universities in your country doing to promote mental health in men? Thank you.
That's a great question, because Australia has a very macho culture. We're very sporty and like to be tough and things. So mental health for men is a significant issue. With universities, we have support systems that are gender blind and gender neutral. We haven't been doing anything specifically for male mental health for staff members per se, but an initiative that I was sharing with my colleagues that is happening through the White Ribbon Group in Australia is training barbers, men in barber shops, to be mental health advocates, so that when the men are there getting their hair cut, getting their shave, they can have a chat. Yeah, and it's a safe space. I've never been in a barber shop, nor do I wish to. I'm sure it looks like real fun from the outside, but that's not for me. And having that safe space, we've got things like men's sheds where men get together to do DIY things. Safe space to talk about these things in an environment that they're comfortable with. So things like that, I think, those small things. Are we training the right people to be frontline mental health? We're training we're training accountants for small businesses as well. Small business owners tend to have a lot of stress and mental health and anxiety managing a small business. So when you're talking to your financial manager and accountant and they can see that your numbers aren't so good, they think, okay, let's counsel you through this. How can we help? So they're just a few examples that I think that, they're early stages in Australia, but they're really promising.
I have a question last. So Dr. Andrea, I could go on and on listening to you. Thank you for that amazing talk. I just have one question, because I teach HR and leadership at SIBM. So often I have had interaction with industry professionals, and you talked about having a particular number, right? A number, right? So when we talk about these numbers, so there's often an accusation that just to, achieve those numbers, somewhere talent gets compromised. So how do you achieve that delicate balance between representation and also giving talent its due. Because it could be gender, again, from either gender, if we take male, female, or even they category, whatever.
I honestly think it's kind of, I don't know if this phrase translates, the boogeyman, that gender quotas are treated like the boogeyman, that, oh no, we really want to achieve this goal, so we're going to compromise quality and throw out the meritocracy in order to achieve it. That's not going to happen. People who are qualified are always going to be promoted above people who are not qualified. It's about opening the playing field so more people can compete. So that's really all it is. It's widening the pool, making sure people are more qualified, elevating people. If people are promoted that aren't meritocratic, that happens without gender quotas anyway. So I think by having any type of target in, I think people will blame that and have it as the boogeyman. But you don't have to have an exact number. You can have a kind of a scope. An organisation I'm working with is saying 40, 40, 20. So we've got a 20% margin of error, but also that's 20% for our increasing non-binary folk as well. So we're looking at, what are some general things? You don't have to say this amount because, for whatever reason. You can say this is our general area, but if you don't have something to work towards that everyone can understand, then it's hard to unite people behind it. So, and in business, in organisations, unfortunately numbers do matter, but it is obviously more than numbers as well.
Thank you. I think margin of error counts for that.
One final question, please, and then we can move on. Thank you.
See, I really like your idea of numbers, and everywhere we have numbers which guide us and push us, and they are good. But the challenge with numbers comes when it doesn't translate to, when you go into that workspace and that number has been achieved, and then people look at you and say, oh, you got this position because we had to meet this quota. So that doesn't really translate well, It creates a lot of disparity within the workspace. So I would advocate I like the idea of margin, especially kind of making it for non-binary folks, but also to be cautious when we use numbers, that those numbers are respected and people within those numbers are not considered, oh, you got this because you're a Hispanic quota, or or you're a male, or you're a female, or for this reason. And that's my challenge, because that diminishes respect. So there's a challenge with numbers too.
People are always going to think that others don't deserve the rights that they have, and they'll find any excuse, whether it's a quota or not. There will always be an excuse for why people are diminishing the accomplishments of others. And targets are an easy way to really stick the knife in that way. But I think that can scare us away from doing that, because people are going to judge us regardless. So I think that let's at least try. Try, see, adjust, always improve. I'm not saying it's the best thing to do, but let's actually try and see how it works, and like I said, do better and better at it every time.
Thank you, Dr. Andrea. I think a whole lot of us want to ask more questions, but I think some of those conversations can take place even after the sessions are over. Actually, Dr. Chindu's own talk builds very well because of his own experiences at Bournemouth trying to operationalize gender policies. So over to you, Dr. Chindu.
Ma'am, sir, if I may interlude, please. So, Renu ma'am, our session chair, I please request you to felicitate Dr. Andrea.
I'm so sorry for ruining the order of things. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. The floor is over to you again.
Thank you, Renu, and good morning, everyone. I have a little presentation, actually. Could we get that up here? All right. Right. I live in Bournemouth, as you probably have gathered, and it's on the south coast of England, a very beautiful place. And that's not Bournemouth, actually. some 25 miles from where I live, across a sliver of the English Channel, there's a place called Swanage, and you get an idea of what that place looks like there. And Bournemouth is also equally beautiful, I must say. Now, Swanage is a beautiful coastal town. It's quiet in the winter months, heaving with tourists in the summer. And if you're anything like me, it'll remind you a little bit about your lost childhood of Enid Blyton and Famous Five and lighthouses and smugglers' caves and caves that run under the seabed. And for a very good reason, because actually Enid Blyton spent a lot of time writing there, and it's one of the models of her Famous Five books as well. So it's got a lot of resonance for me. In September 2022, that's last year, the Swanage Town Council made an important decision. From now on, they said, they'll use chair or chairperson in council meeting instead of chairman, which of course made complete sense, especially as the chairman was and is a woman. So that was all fine, and that was all laudable, and things seemed to be moving in the right direction. Then something happened. So 5 months after that decision, to inject a little bit of gender neutrality into their lives, one fine evening, the town council decided on something else, a different course of action. Now on, they decided to actually reverse that decision. And they said, now on, it would be chairman, pure and simple. No more chairperson or chair or anything of that. So you might wonder why, and there were quite a few reasons that were given. So the people of Swanage Council had some very interesting reasonings behind that. Probably that might be too small to read. But one was that chairman, the old chestnut, the old debunked argument that chairman derives from humankind and mankind. So then that's the term universal for species. And that it was much more polite and proper and respectful than chair. Because chair, obviously, as per that argument, referred to a piece of furniture. So it was much more polite and respectful than chair. The use of Mr. Chairman and Madam Chairman promotes good manners. So that was one of the arguments that was actually made in that council chambers on that day. A second one was what you can read there, which was a kind of a frustration with political correctness. And a rather illogical argument that, of course, there are firemen and policemen and etc. So, hey, why not? Why do we have to have these things? So those were kind of two interesting arguments and an interesting incident that happened very close to where I live and in a very beautiful place. So I'm sure that all of you here will agree with me that all of this was rather unusual. It's not the way that many of us in this room would have liked things to progress. But lamentable as it is, it also offered a very interesting pedagogic opportunity for a bunch of our journalism students at my own institution. So here, I need to give you a little more context about the kind of work that my colleagues and I do at Bournemouth University, and our initiatives around the concept of what we call fusion. That's the idea of bringing together research and industry and professional practice and education in a synergistic manner so that we can address real-world problems, we can try and solve real-world problems. Now, my background, I'm a mixed method researcher. I'm a former journalist who now studies how the news media can help address situations of crisis and humanitarian challenges. My colleagues and I study mainly, we look at disasters and conflicts, and we work with news outlets and journalism associations in vulnerable nations. And our job essentially, and it's a privileged job, I would say, is to see how journalists can play a more productive role, both to change policy as well as embed better practices in the industry. So that's what we do for a living, and it's really a privilege to be able to do that and call it a job. Since 2018, my colleague Aina Thorsen and I have been trying to understand the challenges around the news reporting of gender-based violence. Mainly, we've been focusing on men's violence against women. Like Sneha here and Andrea as well, they mentioned about looking at gender issues with a human rights lens, and that's exactly what we have been trying to do actually. So we have approached this as a human rights crisis, a crisis that's universal, that pervades every organization, every society, every nation. And we've done quite a bit of work. We've done quite a bit of work around this, including undertaking one of the largest multilingual studies on the news reporting of sexual violence, working with UNESCO, working with Symbiosis, and several other partners across India. Through UNESCO, we've published guidelines and recommendations arising out of our research, and we are now working to embed this within the governmental and organizational frameworks. In Nepal, after the 2015 earthquake, we worked to understand the capacity building needs of journalists. And during the pandemic, we worked there again, and also in Sierra Leone, to build an evidence base to help formulate policies that would lead to more resilient news organization and more resilient journalism. So in all this work, two key learning outcomes stand out for me. One is the criticality, like Sneha was referring to, the cross-cutting nature of gender, and how crisis situations further exacerbate the vulnerabilities of women journalists and gender minorities, and the importance of achieving better balance and equity if we are to move towards a more solution-oriented, a more productive and resilient kind of journalism. And the second thing, and this is probably more germane to my reflections today, I think, doing research and creating evidence and writing research-informed policies, that's the easy part. That's the easier part, I would say. The harder part, as Andrea was also mentioning, is effectively operationalizing these policies so that they meaningfully percolate, and that's the key word as well, they actually meaningfully percolate through institutional mechanisms to produce results beyond mere metrics. So let me give you an illustration that sort of connects this to our Swanage story as well. Every year, I speak to journalism students about the need for better diversity and better inclusivity in their journalism, in their reporting, including meaningful gender representation. I point to the fact that typically news sources are all men, and probably less than 1/4 of the news sources of the people who get interviewed for news items are women. The students understand it, they get it theoretically. They have the knowledge, but in my experience, it's not the kind of knowledge that leads to any real internalization or leads to that kind of deep enough understanding or experience of it that motivates them to act. It's not the kind of understanding on which they can build sustainable action. It's not that kind of understanding on which they can effect change. So it was here that the Swanage incident was coming in quite useful for us. What would the students learn? Our teaching team, and we were discussing that, and that's what was crossing our minds, is what would happen if we tasked the students to produce in-depth, research-informed journalism around it. In the past, on similar projects that we worked, we have taken a participatory action research approach. We had some good results of deep learning, and so that's exactly what we did. So we created a project around it. We facilitated visits, we provided them editorial mentorship, and we let 25 students of the MA Multimedia Journalism course from 6 countries work on it together. Okay, thank you. Oh, you want it back? All right. So our teaching team asked for 1 in-depth multimedia production from them. They gave us 2. They did a lot of cool stuff actually with that, with including a historic timeline, an online survey with people from 6 different countries to contextualize their inquiry, a huge number of interviews, some 30 interviews with people in Swanage, of course, but also with leading feminists like Cindy Carter of the Feminist Media Studies, and many other gender experts. So I would love to say here at this point of time very conclusively that it was an enriching experience for all, and it was a wild, wild success. But I can't say that yet, because as the final outputs are still being worked on, but the indications are quite promising, at least for the majority. As it happens, not everyone will engage with with any project with equal measures. So, but the majority of the people who actually engage with it, I think there were some good, interesting outcomes. So you can get a sense of when a journalist begins a conversation with you and say, I never realized, then you know that you are not far off the mark. And you can probably see some of the kind of responses that we were getting that kind of alludes to slightly deeper thinking. So again, two of those. Some interesting thoughts from students out there. So now, why do I bring up Swanage today? I think I want to offer that as an example of super curricular projects, which to me is an effective way to help address social concerns and embed good practices and policies in academic spaces. I use the term super curriculum in not the conventional sense, in a much more expansively, not limiting it merely to curriculum directed at students, but also curriculum for us as life learners, as professionals, as academics, as academic managers. And I use it to mean initiatives wherein research and teaching and practical real-world applications happen in an integrated manner, not as delineated components, each within its own space, and never the twain shall meet. So it's about integrating, it's about bringing together these three aspects and actually having that simultaneously, synergistically, so that things are feeding into each other. As I alluded, such initiatives are useful for enriching staff experiences as well and changing the institutional cultures and subcultures around gender equity. Now, I might be generalizing a bit here, but it's entirely possible that many academics and academic managers look on the drive for gender equity at universities as something that's good, something that's functional, something that we have to do without quite engaging deeply enough with the why of it. Why are we actually trying to do this? Why is there a need of better representation? What is it actually, how is that actually going to make our society better? So we're probably not quite engaged with it enough. And so that means that we're not inspired by the thought either. So in my view, policies and discourses, and we have a lot of these days in terms of gender and gender sensitivity, are only the beginning. They are critical, of course, they are critical. But there is also a hidden danger because they may actually push us into complacency. Quite often, we mistake policies for what they're meant to achieve. We mistake conversation for action. We mistake it for the change we need it to effect. So when we argue for gender equity, like you were mentioning, what we are really seeking to bring about is a change in mindset. Fundamentally, that's what we're aiming for. It's a change in mindset that we actually want. So we are aiming for mindset, not merely metrics. We are seeking to bring about collective action that will bring about a cultural transformation in the way that we think. So policies and HR guidances do not inspire collective action. Experiences do, people do, and people actually inspire collective action. So I want to conclude my talk with a few more quick questions. I promise not to overrun more than 30 seconds. Most universities that are culturally and economically privileged have invested time and thought in developing anti-discriminatory and gender-sensitive policies for their institutions. So a couple of interesting questions that we might want to ask is, have we or are we investing enough time thinking through how best to operationalize these policies? Do we, for instance, have the right people, the rightly motivated people, to inspire change? Are we investing enough time in training people? Are we thinking largely, and this is my feeling, gut feeling, only of diversity? Because diversity doesn't always mean inclusivity. Are we thinking only of metrics, or are we thinking mindset? So I want to leave you with one final slide. And here I want to just say the absence of gender discrimination does not equate to gender equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chindu, for reiterating the importance of connecting important and critical theory related to gender with actual practices in society. And I think this is a good example of the university taking a lead or attempting to take the lead in transforming gender relations, or at least attempting to transform gender relations in wider society. Thank you for that. Finally, we have Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, who will share with us her broad learnings from WISCOM's collaborations with higher educational institutions to institutionalize gender equality via gender audits. I must add here that Dr. Gopinath chaired the committee that produced the Saksham report, and as we heard during Ms. Sneha's talk as well, this report is considered to be a watershed guideline for higher educational institutions in India. Over to you, Dr. Meenakshi.
Good afternoon, friends. It's really a privilege to be in the company of men and women who are pushing the envelope to change the contours of higher education, not just in India but also in the rest of the world. And as usual, Symbiosis has been a leader in this. We can see it in the way in which the conference itself has been structured. For the first time, I've seen a conference which is not dominated by males. And I would love to see perhaps a more equitable representation here. Maybe we should have had one more man on this panel. And so, I compliment Symbiosis. I can see Anita Patankar's magical hand everywhere. And of course, our deep respect to Dr. Majumdar and Divya, without whom none of this would have been possible. So an applause in absentia, I guess, is due. In 1993, a student of mine wrote a poem which went something like this, and she titled it Silence. I'll just read 2 lines of it. Too many women in too many countries speak the same language of silence. My grandmother was always silent, always aggrieved. She believed it was only her husband who had the cosmic right to speak and to be heard. They say it is different now, but sometimes I wonder. And my grandmother thinks I speak too much. And then it goes on like this, and she talked about cultures of silence and cultures of impunity, not just in society, but on campuses. That was 1993. And today, there's another poem which many of you invoke, I know, by Maya Angelou. And she says that my mission in life is not just to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style. And I guess this whole navigating the terrain of gender justice is moving from poem 1 in our 101 readings to poem 2. And that is what I think we are all engaged in doing here. When we look at the university as a transformative space, and we examine the software of it, not just the hardware, of course, the ticking of the boxes on NIRF requirements and NAC requirements and all of that stuff which we all have learned, number crunching, we've all learned uploading, we're putting up the data. But primarily it is really about how do we create these important spaces. How is the university today as a transformative space creating spaces for ruminative spaces, dialogic spaces, inclusive spaces, spaces that can envision a borderless world, spaces for the sight of the dissenting traditions, and above all, for me, in gendered spaces. And I think that's what we are here engaged with at the moment. But we also know, and this is really more for the benefit of our colleagues from, who are not from India, the higher education space in India is an extremely heterogeneous space. One size just does not fit all. It's also mind-boggling. The numbers are mind-boggling. Over 39 million. Of course, I'll stand corrected here because Professor Pankaj Mittal is here, and she's really the last word on statistics on this. Nearly 40 million people inhabiting the higher education space, over 1,100 recognized universities, 11,000 institutes, other institutes of research, 45,000 colleges, each college different from the other, denominational colleges, autonomous colleges, private colleges, public university colleges, teachers' colleges. I mean, the heterogeneity, if you want to call it the diversity, is simply mind-boggling. And therefore, diversity is our reality, and therefore pluralism has to be our approach. And in everything that we do, including gender equity, I would like to submit, and I don't know if my young friends here agree with it, pluralism has to be the approach to the emancipatory ideal of higher education in India, which also wishes to enshrine Articles 14 and 15 on equality and equal opportunity of the Constitution of India. But that's boring. Talking about the Constitution invariably is boring. But what is it that is happening? There is a silent revolution that is happening in the higher education space. Over the last 2 decades, populations that were hitherto denied access to higher education are entering the space in large numbers. Huge aspirations for change are being, in some senses, incubated in this space. Earlier marginalized, underserviced, disadvantaged communities, and the largest number of them today are women. Today, women constitute 49.3% of the population of higher education. And I know in other countries, the numbers are tipping in favor of women, especially in some institutes of higher learning in the United States. But what these numbers are telling us that, as I said, huge aspirations for change are being generated and incubated in the higher education space. And we are really struggling to meet those aspirations. So the university today is also an aspirational space. But what these numbers are not telling us that despite this numeric huge advantage, and the higher education space is the most percentage-wise populated space by women. Not industry, certainly not the labor market, we all know that. Jyoti is here. But the higher education space has the largest number of women today and any other space in India that employs women. But this numeric advantage hides deeper inequalities, and which is why this whole business of numeric equality or equity hides the fact that substantive equality or substantive equity is still lacking. I'm so grateful that Sneha referred to the Saksham report. When we were putting through the Saksham report, we did an interesting thing. We didn't actually do it the conventional way. We had what were known as Jan Sunvais, or public hearings. We went from a pillar to almost across the length and breadth of India to actually listen to voices that were not heard. And what we found was absolutely mind-boggling. Pervasive misogyny in spaces that are meant to be transformative. Pervasive, almost frightening. In the state of Kerala, which has the highest literacy, or among the highest literacy in the Republic of India, you found that there were practices of evaluation, for example, which discouraged women who spoke too much or spoke against gender injustice on campuses. There were differential timings for women and men to enter the gates and leave the campus. There were differential laboratory timings. Of course, dress codes are something we all know about. We don't have to go there. The Pinjra Tod agitation across campuses in India by students spoke to that, called it out, called out these conventional practices of misogyny. And all of this was done in the name of protectionism. We are protecting women because we are protecting their safety. Extremely patriarchal processes were at work, they were legitimized, they were actually written into the DNA of institutions. We actually visited one college in the state of Kerala, and this is difficult for you to believe, where a curtain separated the men from the women in a science class. This was in the year 2018. So we wrote this report called Samagati, which followed on the shall I say, heels of Saksham, and of course it was completely, it was shelved. All vice chancellors denied that situations. Am I already 9 minutes over? I'm sorry. I'm not even a quarter way into this preparation. Anyway, okay. So people talk about STEM and the fact that more and more women are entering the STEM fields. However, we all know the disparities that exist in the STEM field, where very often the laboratory becomes a site of harassment, sexual harassment, and exclusion. We are all familiar with that. But this is not confined to India alone. We know about the famous case of the scientist who actually discovered the DNA helix and how she was denied recognition. She was invisibilized, and the Nobel Peace Prize for that came after her death. We also know about Anne Buckley, who had to spend most of her life in the 1700s masquerading as a male surgeon because she could not really be seen as a female surgeon. So STEM has its hidden problems. But what do we do? So when we worked with over 48 higher education institutions in the country, we decided that NAC decided that gender knowledge is very important. It had given priority to gender knowledge. But nobody really knew the how of it, as you said. How do you translate this really very worthwhile policy into actual practice? And we decided to actually flesh out what are called gender audits and the practice of doing gender audits. And we came up broadly with, I would say, 6 general parameters of how to go about it. We examined the organizational practices. We examined the administrative processes. We examined the curriculum. We examined student welfare initiatives. And we examined, as someone mentioned here, how does the university communicate about itself, its self-perception of itself to the outside world. So in terms of curriculum, when we worked with the SSLA here, it was remarkable because they examined, they put under the scanner their own curriculum and rewrote it through a gender lens. And so history, in many ways, included her story across the STEM subjects as well. All the inclusions and the exclusions, you look at that. So when you look at organizational structure and practices, how does hiring take place? Who hires whom? Who heads committees? Who state backlays? Who actually writes the minutes? How are meetings structured? Are they gendered? And we found out that this whole business of timetable, which is such a big issue on campuses, was so gendered. Just as the access to toilets, I know this is a big issue on campuses for women and for people with disabilities, was so skewed. They were just not existent. Or where there were no bulbs. And in some campuses, they were locked because if you open them, they would be used. And so you know the concomitant problems that women had. So this is about gender. It's not just about men versus women. It's not that men are from Venus and women are from Venus and men are from Mars. So we wanted to really, as Chindu and Sneha and the others have said, change the discourse, and we've developed this handbook which tells you step by step about how you can get a buy-in from the SMT, from the support staff, from the faculty, and from all the stakeholders, management, how to conduct a gender audit on campus. Invariably, gender audits have been equated with reporting on cases of sexual harassment. That is the least of the problems. It's about the discourse. It's about unconscious bias. It's about power distance. It's about replicating the very masculinist mores of hierarchical leadership that even women in positions of authority. Incidentally, you know, of all that, there are only about 3% women vice chancellors in India today. 7%. And one of them is sitting here. And so I think we would give her a big applause. She broke that barrier. And she broke it in a rural university, which completely turned the pyramid around about what so-called empowerment looks like. Because empowerment is used very loosely. We never ask who's empowering whom. And as Bella Abzug said, I don't want to get into the muddy mainstream. I want to create an alternative stream. So, the engendered campus, my friends, is not a feminist ghetto. It is an alternative civic sphere where the mores of engagement are being changed, where women and men are co-writing an alternative script on not just equity, but how to push equity towards equality. It is also about making the connection between the SDGs and 4, which is on quality education, as well as SDG 5, which is a cross-cutting issue across all of the SDG goals. So I will just take two more minutes, and I'm sorry, don't ask me any questions. And I think it's also ensuring that the discourse highlights the fact that more and more people must begin to speak in the metaphoric mother tongue. What Ursula Le Guin had said, the language of inclusion, not whether it's Bengali, Urdu, or French or Japanese, the language of inclusion, the language where all maps change, the language that can speak truth, not to power, truth with power. That is the language that more men and women need to speak, the metaphoric mother tongue. And we also need to recognize gender is about intersectionalities. In India, gender is mediated by class, caste, religion, region. And there are people who are doubly and triply disadvantaged. And therefore, one size just does not fit all. And we need to think of resilience post-COVID. We need to think of the ethics of care, and that is engendering the campus. Ethics of care that recognizes that each learner brings a specific circumstance and a specific set of challenges to the learning space, which are exclusive only to her. And how do teachers today? Yesterday we heard that fabulous discussion on teachers, and for the first time I learned that there is something known as a global civic university. The local and the global combining to create a kind of space of articulation, of democracy, and it's not gender neutral, it's gender just. So Ubuntu is something we need to reaffirm. I am because thou art. And therefore, we need to ask the question that some of my students asked us at a seminar like this, many quoting Eliot, where is the life we've lost in living? Where is the wisdom we've lost in knowledge? And where indeed is the knowledge that we've lost in information? So let not the digital disruptions of this century disrupt our lives beyond compare. And let's look at the culture of respect that Athena, Swan, and various other initiatives have done all over the world. When we are looking at gender audits, I'm happy to offer this book or a soft copy of it to anyone who's interested. It gives you a step-by-step guide to the perplexed, not like Schumacher did, but guide for the perplexed in the higher education space. Thank you for your patience, and sorry I ran out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Meenakshi, for reminding us that the university is a heterogeneous space for dissent, for emancipation, for silent revolutions, but at the same time, a space of deep inequalities, of misogyny, of aspirations, and sometimes where the misogyny intersects with class, caste, religion, and so on. And therefore, the need for a more pluralistic approach to mold our approach in a more pluralistic manner when it comes to operationalizing gender policies. Thank you to our speakers. And Dr. Meenakshi, would you like to know who, Dr. Vaishali, who would like a soft copy of the book? Is there a list that you would like to give, or how do we go about that?
Send me your email addresses, I'll mail it to you.
So we have a WhatsApp group called Uni20. So there we can post the link.
Sure.
If you give it to me, I will
This
post
is
it.
what the book looks like, and I was very privileged to have the support of a gender champion here, who has really been a great source of inspiration. It's called Navigating the Terrain of Gender Justice. It's a step-by-step sort of suggestion. And again, this is only suggested. Each one has to evolve their own culture space. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The floor is now open for audience interaction. I just request you to introduce yourself, ask your question, and also name the speaker you would like the question to be directed at. I will take about 4 questions first, and then if there is time after the speakers have spoken, we can take more. We start with Dr. Pankaj. I think the professor here as well. Mrs. Modi, I will then start with her, then Dr. Pankaj, Swapna there, third, right? And one more person in the back? Yes, you, sir. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Armin Modi, and I work... can you hear me? Yes. I'm Armin Modi, and I work in villages. I attempt to work in villages with women and girls to promote gender equality. My question is to Dr. Sneha Khandekar. You mentioned, several people on the panel mentioned changing mindsets. I think that's a very critical aspect of trying to promote gender equity. But isn't it a bit too late to try to change it at university level? It's children who are vulnerable. It's the age at, 5th grade or 6th grade or something. Perhaps universities need to think of how we can start much younger. That's just my my comment. Thank you.
So I'll just respond to this, and I totally am with you when you say that we need to start young. There is no two ways about looking at that situation without addressing that. But I also feel, others who are here on the panel can also say something on that, that the moment somebody comes to a university, there is a little broader canvas in terms of experiences that they have. When they are at a younger age, their sphere of experiences is a bit limited, where they are likely to be socialized and re-socialized into similar kind of mindsets, while when they step up to a next level, there is also a broader understanding of situations. They're more adults in that sense, and they're able to think through differently if given the choices. Children tend to conform with the norms that are in, what they see around them or in the family. So I think the whole experiences of peer learning and a larger learning happens much more at the university level than the school level, and that's the reason why we need to continue that effort that has started at the school level and reiterating that constantly. See, what we're talking about is, as you say, mindset change, which needs constant reiterations. And what we are looking at here at the university level is doing that. That's how I look at it.
So, can I ask my question, or you will?
Dr. Pankaj, and then we can go to Swapna.
Okay. So first of all, excellent speeches and views expressed by all the speakers. My question is to Dr. Meenakshi. She is my mentor, and I keep learning from her. Madam was mentioning about that, in the higher education space, there are too many women, and when you see the data, the gross enrollment ratio in higher education in India is 0.2% higher for women than men, which is something very great. When we go to any convocation, all the gold medalists, all the first prize holders are all women. When we see the number of teachers, it is around 50-50 at the level of assistant professor. At associate professor, it is 37% women and rest is men. Professors, 27% are women and rest are men. And the vice chancellors, as Dr. Meenakshi mentioned, it's 7% women. So where do all these gold medalists go? So that is my question. And second, we had a delegation from US women vice chancellors. And while talking, they mentioned that in a country like US, women vice chancellors get less salary than the men vice chancellors. The reason being that the salary is negotiated over the table and women tend to negotiate lower. So when we are talking about the transformative role of universities in promoting gender equity, I want to ask how universities can help in reversing these situations. What can be the role of the university in reversing these situations? Thank you.
Coming from you, that's a tall order, Pankaj, but thank you for that question. There are many, many levels at which I think we need to intervene, both at the university level and at the society level. The first is, and Jyoti's here, I know I'm going in where angels fear to tread, but with due respect. You see, the way in which we see the distinction between productive and reproductive work itself. Women are, this is of course chant that everybody repeats, that women's unpaid work is never acknowledged. But do you know it's not acknowledged even within the university system, which should be much more sensitive to this. Women, practically do what is known as time looping, which is, say, if a woman works at a university, her trajectory would not just be home to work, whereas in most cases, and not everywhere, for men it would be home to work and back to home. And maybe a few drinks with friends on the side on the way back home. For women, it would be while going to work, doing all the little chores, picking up the kids, dropping the kids, maybe picking vegetables, picking up medicines for the in-laws, coming back, making that appointment with the piano teacher, and so on and so forth. So they do what is known as time looping. In addition, they have what is known as time poverty. We did one of the exercises that we did in the gender audit was to give members of the faculty and the SMT a kind of time use chart, where we asked them to plot what they do from the time they wake up to the time the day ends for them. And you know what? For the women who were working, say, at the same level, associate professor and professor, the women spent more than 60% of their work in what is termed as non-productive work. And therefore, in terms of opening up, so this is a phrase that is overused and sometimes abused, this work-life balance, I think universities need to be more sensitive. So if we are, the other is encouraging women to go to more conferences, making it easier for them to visibilize their work. Women will always, undersell themselves, and hence this whole lean-in philosophy. I'm not in favor of the lean-in because I'm looking at an alternative discourse than the aggressive kind of hard sell, me kind of thing. However, the universities can engage in this. Of course, many universities don't have creches for child rearing, zones of comfort for professional women. Making it easier to take not just childcare leave, but sabbaticals, which are assisted, and ensuring that their papers get published and discussed. Women are very, very hesitant. Please, I don't want to set up these binaries. I think, I know many men who are feminists, and they're great friends. Without the men, we'd be nowhere. And I think we've got to go walk with them to co-create a new society. So, however, I'm just giving you this by way of comparison. The economists also need to re-look at how they use the matrices for GDP, for counting GDP. Women's work is not acknowledged, much of women's work. So these conversations can start at the university level. Skew the sabbatical in favor of the women researchers for a while and see what so-called outputs emerge. Process is equally important. Hold their hands. Empathy, ethics of care, I think is not just vis-a-vis students, but among peer groups of faculty as well. And I think you already did that in your university, Pankaj. And I think more and more people need to hear about the experiments that you did and how you made a primarily rural community of women learners break their barriers, both in terms of marketing, in terms of the kind of produce that they brought, and this whole thing about making sure that no one can, as Eleanor Roosevelt said, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Knowing that there is a possibility and again, breaking the mentality of scarcity, cultivating abundance. And I think we can do this through discourse, we can do it through focus groups, we can through it. And it's not just about anti-sexual harassment. After all, that phrase was coined by a Cornell instructor in 1969, I think. And then, of course, followed by the Me Too movement. We also had LOSHA, the list of sexual harassed academics. And that turned out to be a pretty, shall I say, witch hunting kind of exercise. It didn't gel well with the Indian ecosystem. However, I think while acts of impunity need to be called out, we have to buttress them with acts of affirmation where we bring in this. I think this may go a long way. You know better. Thank you.
Swapna, in order to have some gender balance, can we have the gentleman ask the question and you can ask during lunch? Yeah? Yes, please go ahead.
Hello, I am Vidya Bhushan Arya from Symbiosis Center for Media and Communication. Any panel member can answer my question. I think limiting the debate of gender justice and equality to university campus, we are limiting the debate. What I feel that we should involve more and more external stakeholders. Now, who are these external stakeholders? Politics, market, and media. Actually, they are the major violators of gender justice. So by involving them in this discourse, we can expedite the discourse itself, so that they take some share in creating this kind of environment, because we are doing the same thing when it comes to internship and placement. So why not to apply that thinking in creating this gender justice debate? Thank you.
The question is on the responsibility of media institutions, politicians, market in creating this environment and therefore doing their bit to change that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, is my response. Of course, this debate should not be limited to universities. It also has to happen in universities as well. And I think when we speak about education, we need to be speaking about an education that transcends the boundaries of universities, that intersects with real world as well. And that's always been what I've been advocating and what I try to do and media has a huge role to play in this, of course. But there is one problem that you will face, and that's coming out of our research that I cited here. The media, women journalists in the media is also afflicted by this to a huge amount. So when you're already vulnerable, how do you actually create that conversation really? Because you yourself are fighting for your own chance, really. So when we speak about gender, these are the people who should be creating these conversations. And what you will find in many media organizations is that, and we did quite a bit of work around that, is that there isn't a clear gender policy. So when they're actually speaking about policies, that's limited to sexual harassment policies. And when we are speaking about policies about reporting sexual violence, for instance, or gender-based violence, if you look at it, it's so underreported. And one of the findings from our study was about the huge amount of gender-based violence that are existing within news spaces, just news environments. And when we speak about gender-based violence, a lot of the conversations that we had was a particular situation where journalists or female journalists were not recognizing what it had become so normalized that they were not even recognizing that. So till our researchers, till our interviewers were pointing out the fact, okay, and when we're analyzing the data, that's when it kind of clicks to them. Till we are pointing that out to them, that's just routine, So that's a situation that we are there. But yes, to sum that thought up, yes, it needs to happen much beyond universities, and media has got a crucial role to play. But I don't think that we have reached a stage in the way that the news media thinks about reporting these things, that we are doing a proper job or a productive job.
Thank you, sir, for that question. Comment really. It's so incisive. But what is particularly encouraging is that increasingly now, the border the so-called ivory tower idea there's been a meltdown. The line between the town and the gown has become porous now. So how do we bring the town and gown together? The engaged university is the flavor of the month. Universities that engage with social responsibility. I assume that is what was meant by a global civic university. One suggestion, because universities are really primarily areas where a discourse and a signal goes to society, where the ideas are kind of germinated and communicated. One thing that universities such as Symbiosis could do is that when you have these recruitments, on-campus recruitments, and companies come here, you can ask them to share what their gender policies are. How gender just are you? And we are sending a signal to you that we will prefer that our students work with companies that are gender just. It's a small signal, but it can go a long way, and you can be a leader in that in many ways. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of continue with what ma'am has just said, that this conversations or the positioning of any university that is there, and in a way the power that they have with the external stakeholders, it could be industry, it could be other academia or any other. I think we need to use our power positively in influencing their thought process in a very subtle way maybe, but they are important. Even having these conversations mind, even if they see something that will also impact them differently. So I strongly feel that this power that we have as an education, higher education institute, and particularly somebody like Symbiosis, we should use it positively to influence people directly, indirectly, whichever way we can.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for now, but all those who still have questions for our speakers can carry the conversations forward during lunch. Before I go to the vote of thanks, let me just quickly highlight some of the key takeaways from today's session, which mainly deal with the approaches to and operationalization of gender practices. Some of those key takeaways are that the underlying emphasis should be to look at gender not as a women's concern but as a broader human rights concern. The need to broaden the definition of gender so that we don't alienate those who are not women, that we don't alienate men or sexual minorities. The importance of connecting critical gender theory with practical applications in order to help students internalize what is being taught in the classroom, as well as change mindsets in and outside of the university. One other important thing is to constantly re-examine diversity and exclusion policies in order to improvise on definitions of diversity and inclusion. And something very interesting was the need to also examine whether we are looking at gender interventions in order to bring about changes within already deeply hierarchical spaces. Rather, should we look at or start envisioning alternative civic spaces. So these are all some of the underlying takeaways and themes. Very challenging ones, but we have our practitioners who can lead these conversations. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, thank you. So thank you, Dr. Meenakshi.
Thank you, Dr. Renu. It was a wonderfully summed up session. Thank you to the speakers and to the audience for the wonderful questions posed during the question answer session. May I request Madam Pankaj Mittal to come forward to felicitate the speakers, please. First, Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath. What a wonderful speech, ma'am. Miss Neha Khandikar. Dr. Chindu Sridharan. And the chairperson for today, Dr. Renu Vinod. Now I request all the speakers and the chairperson to go ahead for a photo. Dr. Mittal, please wait for a photo, for common photo.